Hi guys, it's Aisling back talking to you again on the Waterstones vlog. This month I'm reviewing Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders, which is the Man Booker Prize winner for 2017. George Saunders is probably known to most people as a fairly prolific short story writer, probably one of the most prolific working and writing today. He's got several collections published and some novellas as well. But Lincoln in the Bardo is probably his only kind of standard length novel. Now, I say standard, but there's actually nothing standard about Lincoln in the Bardo, but I'll get to that in just one moment. What I want to talk about first is where George Saunders got the idea for Lincoln in the Bardo. So I was doing a little bit of research before filming this and reading some interviews with George Saunders. And he said that he was told a story of how after Abraham Lincoln's son, Willie, died at the age of 11, he would go into the crypt where his son was interned and hold the body several nights in a row. And this image, this story, just really stayed with George Saunders, and that was how he was inspired to write Lincoln in the Bardo. Now, the Lincoln who is in the Bardo in the book is actually not Abraham Lincoln, it's Willie Lincoln. So a lot of the action follows the son, Willie Lincoln, who is age 11 when he dies. And the Bardo is actually the Tibetan term for the kind of location between death and reincarnation, although it doesn't focus too much on religion because there are elements of kind of the Christian afterlife and the Egyptian afterlife in there. And I read that George Saunders threw that in because he didn't want to make any kind of idea of limbo too literal, which I thought was really cool. Now, what makes this novel really, really different was that there's pretty much no narration. It's all direct speech, but it's all kind of denoted to different people, different fictional texts. And most of the story is told by Hans Vollmann, the Reverend Everly Thomas, and Roger Bevans III. And after they've said a line, you can see here, it's denoted who said each line. So it's almost like a little script, and the whole story sort of unravels with them telling you what's happening. And sometimes another character will denote another character's speech or describe what someone else is doing, and it's really, really beautiful, especially the passages where Willie Lincoln is speaking, because his speech is kind of broken and he's cutting himself off before he finishes a sentence or finishes his thought and he moves on to another thought. It's really, really beautiful. There are hundreds of characters though. As time goes on and we're in the Bardo, in the afterlife, limbo, whatever you want to call it, with Willie Lincoln and all these different characters, it becomes sort of cataclysmic and confusing, but in a good way. I was sort of overwhelmed sometimes by the sheer amount of voices and emotion and, you know, stories being told about these people's past lives and how they had come to be in the Bardo and how they needed to leave the Bardo and what they needed to do to get out of there. And I felt like it was more of a commentary on life, really, rather than death. I think a lot of people maybe hearing the name would think that it's some sort of political, you know, fictionalized biography, although there are a lot of elements of truth about Abraham Lincoln and kind of how he was perceived as president and what his family life was like. It definitely focuses more on this kind of fantastical sort of magical realism realm that George Saunders has created. I would recommend it I would recommend it to someone who perhaps has read books that are more unusual and likes quite unusual books. Although I think anyone could get into it. Once you start reading it and you get used to all the different voices telling you things and talking to you, it sort of becomes like learning another language, because I actually finished this book yesterday and sat down today to try and read another book, and then I kind of found it difficult that this book was just sort of written in normal paragraphs, whereas Lincoln in the Bardo had been written in this really, really strange way, almost like reading a script, like I said, but more direct, like they're sort of speaking to you, or like you're in the Bardo with them. It was kind of like being able to step inside somewhere where we would never normally get to see, which I thought was incredibly beautiful. I'm definitely going to check out some of George Saunders' short stories and his novellas as well, because I just found this book really quite inspiring, really, really different. And it wasn't at all what I expected, because I kind of just picked it up being like, oh, it's the Man Booker Prize winner, it's got to be good. But it just kind of really sort of changed the way I'm going to look at novels now, you know, because there's so much scope really for what you can do. And I think Lincoln in the Bardo really proves that. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this review. I hope you found it helpful, and I'll see you next month with another review. Bye.